He refused her handshake, treating her like she didn't exist. She served him with trembling hands, hiding exhaustion and anger. Months later, the tables turned and she held the power to stop him. The billionaire who mocked a waitress learned that respect can't be bought. The crystal chandelier above her head cost more than she'd earned in 3 years. Elena Rivera knew this because she'd overheard 2 guests discussing it while she refilled their champagne. She moved through the hotel ballroom like a ghost, her black vest and bow tie the uniform of invisibility. She'd been working double shifts for 8 months straight. Her father's medical bills didn't care about exhaustion. The cancer treatments were experimental and expensive, and insurance covered almost nothing. So Elena smiled through the ache in her feet as she balanced trays that grew heavier with each hour. This job paid better than her morning shift at the diner. She needed both. She needed every dollar. The crowd tonight was different. These people didn't just have money. They had the kind of wealth that changed cities, that moved markets. Elena had learned to read them over the years. The way they held their wine glasses. The way they looked through service workers like they were furniture. She was collecting empty plates when she heard his voice. It cut through the noise like a blade, smooth and cold. The Henderson merger is dead. They don't have the infrastructure. It's amateur hour dressed up in a decent suit. Elena glanced up. The man speaking stood near the bar, surrounded by executives who hung on his every word. He was maybe early 40s, with sharp features and dark hair styled with careless precision. His tuxedo fit perfectly. Everything about him radiated control and money and the absolute certainty that he was the smartest person in any room. Marcus Dalton. She recognized him from newspapers she skimmed during breaks. Billionaire. Tech mogul turned private equity titan. The man who'd built 3 companies from nothing before 35. Now he bought struggling corporations and either saved them or stripped them for parts. The hotel manager, Robert, approached with Marcus at his side. Elena's stomach sank. Robert was always trying to impress big clients, always putting staff in uncomfortable positions. "Mr. Dalton, I'd like you to meet our exceptional team," Robert said. He gestured toward Elena and 2 other servers. "This is James, Sarah, and Elena. They'll be taking care of your section personally." James stepped forward first, extending his hand. Marcus shook it briefly, barely looking at him. Then Sarah, who received the same mechanical greeting. Then Marcus's eyes landed on Elena. She saw something shift in his expression. His gaze traveled from her face down to her uniform and back up. She stood there as the silence stretched. James and Sarah had already stepped back. Robert was smiling, waiting. Elena did what she'd been trained to do. She extended her hand, a polite greeting, the basic courtesy that every person in that ballroom had exchanged 100 times. "Good evening, Mr. Dalton. It's nice to meet you." Marcus looked at her outstretched hand like she'd offered him something dirty. His hands stayed exactly where they were, one holding scotch, the other in his pocket. He didn't move. He just stared at her hand, then looked back at her face with faint distaste. "I'm sure you'll do your job adequately," he said flatly. Then he turned to Robert. "The Johnsons just arrived. I need to speak with them." He walked away. Just like that. Left Elena standing with her hand extended into empty air, her face burning as Robert coughed awkwardly and hurried after Marcus. James and Sarah had seen everything. So had several nearby guests. Elena slowly lowered her hand, feeling slapped. She understood what had happened. Marcus Dalton had looked at her uniform, her position, her brown skin and tired eyes, and decided she wasn't worth the basic courtesy of a handshake. To him, she was furniture. And you didn't shake hands with furniture. Elena went back to work. What else could she do? She had 6 hours left. She had bills waiting at home. She had a father who needed medicine. So she swallowed the bitter taste and kept moving, refilling glasses and clearing plates and pretending her hand didn't still feel like it was hanging in the air. Rejected. For 2 hours, she avoided Marcus's section. But the ballroom wasn't infinite. She was carrying champagne flutes when someone bumped her hard from behind. The tray tilted. She caught it, but her elbow knocked into something solid. She turned and found herself face to face with Marcus again. She'd struck his arm, spilling red wine down his pristine white shirt. The conversation around them died. Marcus looked down at the stain, then up at Elena. Something cold flickered in his eyes. "Of course," he said quietly. "Of course it would be you." "I'm so sorry, sir," Elena said immediately. Her heart hammered. "Let me get something to clean that." You'll what? Cover a $1,500 shirt on a waitress's salary? The same salary you earn serving people who actually matter?" Heat flooded her face. Around them, guests had stopped to watch. "It was an accident." "Someone pushed me." "An accident," Marcus repeated. "Do you know how important this evening is? I'm closing a deal worth $300 million and I have to walk around looking like I can't afford competent staff." The word hit her like a blow. Competent. As if this was her fault. Elena's hands tightened on the tray. She wanted to tell him someone had shoved her. That she'd been on her feet 11 hours straight. That his shirt cost more than her father's medication for a month. But she didn't. She couldn't afford to lose this job. "I apologize, sir," she said. The words tasted like ashes. Marcus pulled a business card from his wallet. "Take this to your manager. Tell him Marcus Dalton requests you be reassigned away from any events I attend. I don't work with careless people. I certainly don't want them near me." The last sentence landed like a punch, as if her presence itself was offensive. Elena stared at the card, remembering how he'd refused her handshake hours earlier. How he'd looked at her like she was nothing. She reached for the card. Marcus pulled it back slightly, just an inch. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that she had to lean forward. When she did, he dropped it. It fluttered to the floor, landing face down on polished marble. He just looked at her, waiting. The message was clear. "Pick it up. Bend down. Remember your place." Elena felt something crack inside her chest, but her face didn't change. She'd learned that skill long ago. She bent down and picked up the card. When she straightened, Marcus had already turned away, laughing at something a companion said. For him, she'd ceased to exist. Just like when he'd refused her handshake. She walked to the kitchen on disconnected legs. Under harsh fluorescent lights, she stared at the card. Marcus Dalton, CEO, Dalton Capital, as if she could forget. "You okay?" Rosa, another waitress, touched her shoulder. "Don't let him get to you. These rich guys are all the same." Elena couldn't speak. She just stood there, holding the card of a man who'd treated her like garbage. A man who wouldn't shake her hand. A man who wouldn't acknowledge she was human and deserved basic respect. She finished her shift in a blur, turned in the card to her manager, who sighed and said she'd be scheduled for different events. Collected her pay, changed in the staff bathroom. When she walked into the cold night, it was past midnight. Her phone buzzed. A text from the visiting nurse. "Your father had a good evening. Ate some soup. Asking for you." Elena stood on the sidewalk and let herself feel it for one moment. The humiliation of that refused handshake. The rage. The bone-deep tiredness of working 2 jobs and still falling behind. The shame of standing with her hand extended while Marcus Dalton looked through her like she was invisible. Then she locked it away. She had a father who needed her. Bills that wouldn't wait. 6 hours before her next shift. What she didn't know was that Marcus Dalton's refusal to shake her hand would become the least significant thing between them. That the wheels she'd set in motion would eventually strip away everything he thought he knew about power and control and who mattered in this world. But that reckoning was months away. For now, Elena went home and tried to forget the feeling of standing with her hand hanging in empty air, rejected like she was nothing at all. 3 months later, Elena stood in a conference room on the 42nd floor of Carlson Tower and felt like she was living in someone else's life. The view stretched across the entire city. She smoothed her navy blazer and tried to steady her breathing. Her father had died 6 weeks ago. Pneumonia, not the cancer. He'd passed quietly with Elena holding his hand. The grief was still raw. Sometimes she'd forget he was gone, reach for her phone to call him, and reality would crash back. But something had happened in those final weeks. Her father had pressed an old folder into her hands. Inside were documents she'd never seen. Stock certificates, property deeds, partnership agreements. Her father hadn't just been a retired factory worker. Decades ago, he'd been a founding partner of a small company called Rivera Tech Solutions. He'd sold most shares when Elena was a baby, used the money to pay off their house. But he'd kept a small percentage nearly forgotten. That small percentage had grown. Rivera Tech had been acquired by larger firms, and through mergers over 30 years, those forgotten shares had transformed. When Elena tracked down what they'd become, she'd stared at the papers for an hour, convinced there was a mistake. Her father's stake had converted into 7% ownership of Hartman Industrial Group, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in the country. 7% of an $8 billion company. 7% made Elena one of the largest individual shareholders. The lawyers found her 2 weeks after the funeral. The documents were real, and Hartman Industrial was being acquired by Dalton Capital in a $3 billion merger. As a major shareholder, Elena had the right to attend final negotiations. More than that, she had the right to vote on whether the merger would proceed. She'd almost refused, almost let the lawyers handle everything. But then she'd remembered standing with her hand extended while Marcus Dalton looked through her. She remembered picking his business card off the floor. She remembered every second. So here she was, former waitress, walking into a room where the most powerful business leaders were finalizing a deal that would reshape an industry. The conference room was half full. Executives in expensive suits clustered around the mahogany table. At the far end, she saw him. Marcus Dalton, looking exactly as he had 3 months ago. Sharp suit, confident posture, that same certainty that the world would bend to his will. He didn't look up when she entered. She was just another person in business attire. Elena took her assigned seat. Her nameplate read, Ms. Elena Rivera, shareholder representative, Hartman Industrial Group. She ran her finger across it, barely believing it was real. The meeting started. Jonathan Hartman, the CEO, walked through merger terms. His company was struggling with debt. Dalton Capital was offering a buyout that would save thousands of jobs. It sounded like salvation. But Elena had spent 2 weeks reading every document. She'd studied the terms until her eyes burned. She'd seen what was buried in fine print. The merger would save Hartman Industrial, yes, but it would give Marcus complete control. Within 18 months, he could restructure however he wanted. Close plants, lay off workers. Strip valuable assets. The employees would get 2 years of security at most. After that, they were at his mercy. Marcus stood to present his vision. He spoke smoothly, painting a picture of innovation and growth. He made it sound like he was doing them a favor. Elena watched him and felt that same cold rage. He still didn't recognize her. She was just another suit at the table. His gaze passed right over her without stopping. When Marcus finished, Jonathan asked if anyone had questions. The room was silent. This was just a formality. Everyone knew how the vote would go. Elena raised her hand. Marcus's eyes flicked to her, mildly curious. He still didn't recognize her. Yes, Jonathan said. Ms. Rivera, was it? Do you have a question? I have several, Elena said steadily. The merger gives Dalton Capital full control. But I don't see binding commitments to maintain employment levels. I don't see pension protections. I don't see restrictions on asset sales. Can you explain why the workers aren't being protected? Surprise rippled through the room. Marcus's expression sharpened. Ms. Rivera, I understand these financial matters can be complex for smaller shareholders, but this merger is in everyone's best interest. I understand the terms perfectly, Elena said. I've read every page. What I'm asking is why you expect approval for a deal that gives you complete control with zero accountability. Marcus's jaw tightened. With all due respect, the board has reviewed these terms extensively. I'm not sure what expertise you're bringing to this discussion. There it was, that same contempt, dressed up in polite language. The implication that she didn't belong, didn't know enough to matter. My expertise, Elena said quietly, is a 7% ownership stake in Hartman Industrial, which makes me the 3rd largest individual shareholder in this room. So when I ask questions about a deal that could destroy 15,000 lives, I expect answers, not dismissal. Absolute silence. Every head turned. Jonathan's assistant frantically checked her tablet, then whispered in his ear. Jonathan's eyes went wide. Marcus had gone very still. 7%? Inherited from my father. He was one of the original partners in Rivera Tech Solutions, which eventually became Hartman Industrial. The shares were held in trust for decades. I became legal owner 6 weeks ago. She watched Marcus process this. Watched him realize this woman he'd been dismissing actually had enough power to block his entire merger. Hartman's charter required 75% shareholder approval. 7% could rally other concerned shareholders. 7% could kill his deal. I see, Marcus said slowly. His tone had changed. Now he was actually looking at her, seeing her as someone who mattered. Perhaps we should discuss your concerns. I'm sure we can address any issues. I'm sure we can, Elena said. She pulled out a document her lawyers had prepared. I've drafted an amended term sheet. It includes binding employment guarantees for 5 years, full pension protections, and restrictions on asset sales without shareholder approval. If you agree, I'll vote in favor. She slid the document across the table. It stopped directly in front of Marcus. He stared at it like it might bite him. Jonathan cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a 15-minute recess? The room erupted. Executives formed urgent huddles. Marcus's team reviewed Elena's terms. She sat calmly and waited. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. 10 minutes later, Marcus approached. His expression was carefully neutral. He extended his hand. Ms. Rivera, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Marcus Dalton. It seems we got off on the wrong foot. Elena looked at his outstretched hand. The same hand he'd refused to offer 3 months ago. She let the moment stretch, let him stand there waiting. Then she met his eyes. Really met them, held his gaze with all the weight of that hotel ballroom night pressing between them. And she saw the exact moment he recognized her. The exact second his memory clicked and he realized where he'd seen her face. The blood drained from his face. His hand trembled slightly, still hanging in the air. He knew she remembered everything. The refused handshake, the contempt, the business card falling to the floor. Every moment of humiliation was right there between them, and now the power had completely shifted. Elena reached out slowly and shook his hand. Her grip was firm. Mr. Dalton? She said quietly, so only he could hear. I believe you wanted to discuss protecting the workers who actually built this company. The ones you thought didn't matter. Should we continue? Marcus's face was pale, but he recovered quickly. Yes, he said tightly. That would be beneficial. They sat down. For 2 hours they negotiated. Elena had done her homework. She knew exactly what she wanted and how far she could push. She fought for every protection, every guarantee, and slowly he gave in. He had no choice. Without her 7%, the merger would fail. His $3 billion deal would collapse. All his certainty that he controlled this situation depended on getting Elena Rivera's approval. By the end, she'd won almost everything. 5-year employment guarantees, full pension protections, restrictions on asset sales, an independent oversight committee with worker representation. It meant 15,000 people would keep their jobs and dignity. When they signed the amended agreement, Marcus's hand shook slightly. Everyone could feel the power shift. As people filed out, Marcus caught Elena's arm gently. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. For that night at the hotel, I was wrong. About everything. About you. Elena looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her father, working his whole life to build something lasting. About all the workers who kept the world running, while people like Marcus made deals and took credit. You were wrong about a lot of things, she said. You still are, but at least now those workers have protection from your mistakes. She walked away, leaving Marcus alone. In the elevator, she caught her reflection in polished brass. She looked different. Not just the suit instead of the uniform. Something deeper had changed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rosa. How did the meeting go? Elena smiled as she typed. Better than expected. I think Dad would have been proud. The elevator descended. She had decisions to make now, new responsibilities. But she also had knowledge that she'd stood in a room with the man who'd treated her like nothing, and she'd beaten him at his own game. Not through cruelty, but through preparation and courage to demand respect. Marcus Dalton had refused to shake her hand because he thought she was beneath him. Now he'd been forced to shake it while she held all the power. And the real victory wasn't his humiliation. It was the 15,000 workers who would keep their jobs because Elena Rivera had refused to be invisible. She walked out into afternoon sun feeling lighter. Her father was gone, and that pain would never fully heal. But she'd honored his legacy. She'd taken his gift and used it to make the world a little more fair. And somewhere 42 floors above, Marcus Dalton was learning the hardest lesson of his life. That people aren't worth more because they wear expensive suits. That the waitress you dismissed today might be the shareholder who destroys your deal tomorrow. And that true power comes from courage to demand that everyone be treated with basic human dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from. She turned the power he once denied her into justice for thousands. The waitress he ignored became the force no billionaire could dismiss. Her courage proved that respect can't be bought. It must be earned. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Could you stand your ground? Comment below and share your thoughts. We want to hear from you. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe from wherever you're watching. Hit the bell icon too, so you never miss another story that inspires.